The boy's voice cracked through the sound of engines like glass breaking in silence. He was no older than 9, standing barefoot in the middle of the alley, clutching a broken toy truck in his hands. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, one sleeve torn, his bottom lip trembling. Behind him, the small grocery where his mother worked stood half closed, its door hanging crooked on a broken hinge. A group of men had come earlier, men from the factory on the edge of town, the one that paid everyone too little but still wanted more. They had stormed in shouting about unpaid dues and debts no one understood. When his mother tried to stop them from taking the shop's last delivery crate, one of them shoved her so hard she hit the floor. The boy screamed and threw his toy at them, but they only laughed. Then they left. Now he stood there, the toy in pieces, his mother inside trying to breathe through the pain in her ribs. The sound of a motorcycle echoed from the corner, low and steady, until a tall figure on a black bike rolled into view. The rider stopped, flipped up his visor, and the boy saw a face marked by time and road dust. A man named Colt, leader of the Guardian Riders, the same biker group that had become the city's quiet protectors after too many people had been forgotten. Colt looked at the boy, then at the broken door, and his jaw tightened. "What happened, kid?" he asked, voice calm but heavy. The boy sniffed hard. "They broke my toy," he said, his words tumbling fast between sobs. "And they hit my mom. She tried to stop them, but they said they'd come back tomorrow." Colt crouched, steady and slow, taking the toy pieces from the boy's shaking hands. "Who were they?" The boy pointed toward the direction of the old factory. "Men from there. The one with the red trucks." Colt looked toward the horizon, where the smokestacks rose like crooked fingers against the fading sky. "You take care of your mom, all right?" he said, setting the pieces in the boy's hand. "We'll take care of them." He stood, turned toward the street, and pressed the radio button on his helmet. "Brothers, meet me by the highway," he said. "We're riding to the factory." Within minutes, the air filled with the growl of engines. One by one, bikes appeared from every street. The Guardians, all dressed in worn leather and quiet purpose. No one shouted, no one revved for show. They rode like a tide of steel and thunder, silent but unstoppable. By the time they reached the edge of town, the factory loomed ahead, its lights dim, the fence lined with rusted signs that read private property. Colt signaled with a raised hand, and the bike slowed to a stop. Rocco, his second in command, pulled up beside him. "You sure about this?" he asked. "We're walking into their ground." Colt's eyes didn't leave the factory gate. They walked into a kid's home first. They dismounted and walked through the gate, the noise of boots crunching gravel echoing in the night. The foreman, a broad man with a gut full of arrogance, stepped out from the warehouse with a half smirk. "Well, look who it is," he said, spitting to the side. "The heroes." "What? You lose your road?" Colt stared at him. "You laid hands on a woman today. Broke a kid's toy for good measure. You're going to fix both." The foreman laughed. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're just a bunch of punks with bikes." Colt stepped closer, his tone still even. "Maybe. But tonight, the punks outnumber you." Behind him, the rest of the Guardians fanned out silently. The foreman's grin faltered. "You don't scare me," he said, but his voice trembled. Colt leaned in, his words quiet but sharp. "Then you haven't learned what fear is yet." Moments later, the warehouse lights flickered on, and the men inside froze. 20 bikers stood at the door, blocking every exit. Colt walked through the aisle, knocking a wrench off a table with one hand, the sound ringing out like a warning. "You're going to pay what you owe that family," he said. "You're going to replace every broken thing you touched. And you're going to remember this night the next time you think about raising your hand to someone who can't fight back." The foreman spat again, but said nothing. Rocco dropped a small envelope on the table. Photos, copies of paperwork, and something that made the man's face pale. Colt nodded toward it. "Your accountant's been sloppy. You've been stealing from your own workers. I could have sent this to the police, but I figured we'd start with a talk." The man's hands trembled. "What do you want?" Colt's voice was ice. "Justice." By dawn, the factory was quiet again. No one had been hurt, no one needed to be. But the next morning, every worker who showed up found their paychecks fixed, their back wages paid, and a new manager at the front office. The old one had left during the night, without a word. Later that day, Colt returned to the alley. The boy was sitting beside his mother, who had a bandage on her arm but a faint smile on her lips. Colt handed the boy a small box. Inside was a new toy truck, metal, not plastic, painted red like the one he'd lost. The boy's eyes widened. "You found it," he whispered. Colt smiled. "Something like that." The boy looked at him, then asked the question only a child would dare. "Did you hit them?" Colt shook his head. "No. Sometimes words hit harder." The boy grinned, clutching the toy to his chest. His mother whispered a thank you, her voice soft but strong. Colt nodded once and turned to leave. The engines roared to life again, echoing down the street, fading into the sound of a city waking up. And as the first light of morning spilled across the cracked pavement, the boy pushed his new toy truck through the dust, his laughter rising like a promise that not all stories end in fear. Some end in protection. That night the city felt alive in a way Colt hadn't felt for years. The Guardians rode through the empty streets in silence, the hum of their engines echoing off closed storefronts and flickering streetlights. They didn't talk, didn't celebrate what they'd done. They never did. The job was simple: protect the people no one else would. That was their rule. When they reached the outskirts of town, Colt slowed his bike and signaled for the others to stop. They pulled into an abandoned gas station, its faded sign swaying in the wind. Rocco killed his engine and turned to him. "That was risky," he said. "If anyone finds out what we did tonight, the factory owners will come for us." Colt leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette. "Let them," he said. "You can't scare men who've already lost everything." Rocco smirked. "You think this will change things?" Colt exhaled smoke, his eyes tracing the dark horizon. "Maybe not for the city. But for that kid? Yeah. He'll grow up knowing someone stood up for him when nobody else did. That's enough." They rode back toward the city at dawn, splitting off one by one until Colt was alone. The sun had barely risen when he parked near the shelter by the bridge. Inside, the same homeless man he'd helped months ago was serving breakfast to a line of people. When he saw Colt, he smiled. "You look tired," he said. "Long night." Colt shrugged. "You could say that." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The man glanced at him. "You ever get tired of saving people?" Colt smiled faintly. "Only when I can't." Later that day, news spread fast. Someone had anonymously mailed documents to the city's labor board, proof of fraud and abuse inside the factory. By noon, inspectors arrived, and by evening, the company's logo had been pulled down. No one knew who sent the files, but rumors swirled that the Guardians had a hand in it. Some called them vigilantes, others called them heroes. Colt didn't care about either word. That afternoon, as he tuned his bike at the garage, he heard small footsteps behind him. When he turned, the boy from the alley stood there holding a brown paper bag. "Mom made cookies," he said shyly. Colt chuckled. "For me?" The boy nodded and set the bag down. "She said you probably didn't eat yet." Colt smiled, touched in a way he couldn't say out loud. "Tell her thank you," he said. "And you keep that toy safe this time." The boy hesitated, then asked, "Will you come back?" Colt paused, tightening a screw on the bike. "Maybe, but you don't need me to." The boy frowned. "Why not?" Colt looked up, his voice soft. "Because you've got something stronger than us now." The boy tilted his head. "What's that?" "A mother who still stands up even after being knocked down," Colt said. "And a reason to never let anyone make you small." The boy smiled, not fully understanding, but somehow feeling it all the same. He waved goodbye and ran back toward the alley. Colt watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. That evening, the Guardians gathered at the diner they always used as their checkpoint. The waitress, Nancy, had already heard the story, how a group of bikers had rolled into a factory and walked out with justice. "You guys are getting famous again," she said, pouring Colt another cup of coffee. Rocco laughed. "Famous is bad for business." Colt smirked. "Let them talk. The more they talk, the more the ones hiding in shadows start to sweat." He glanced out the window where the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. Fear works both ways. As the storm rolled in, a flash of lightning revealed something across the street, a mural freshly painted on the brick wall beside the grocery. It showed a small boy holding a red toy truck, a woman standing behind him, and a line of bikes in the background under a glowing sunrise. At the bottom were 5 words written in bright white paint. "We are not afraid anymore." Colt stared at it, rain dripping from his hair, and for a moment, something in his chest eased. Rocco came up beside him, whistling low. "Guess the kid's got an artist in the family." Colt smiled faintly. "Guess so." The next morning, he got a call from Chief Morales. The same woman who'd once told him his way of helping wasn't the right way. "You've been busy again," she said. "You're lucky I like results." Colt chuckled. "You finally realizing you can't fix everything with badges?" Morales sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm realizing the city needs men who don't need permission to do what's right." Before hanging up, her voice softened. "You made people believe again, Colt. Don't let that slip." That night, as the city lights blinked awake and the factory stood empty, Colt rode past the mural one last time. He stopped briefly, watching a group of kids trace the painted bikes with their fingers. They laughed, pretending to ride, pretending to be brave. And maybe, Colt thought, they already were. He revved his engine once, the sound rolling through the street like thunder, and then he rode into the night. Somewhere behind him, the boy pushed his toy truck along the curb, chasing the echo of that roar like a promise. A few weeks later, the mural had become more than just paint on a wall. It had become a gathering place. Every evening, families came to leave flowers, kids drew chalk bikes beside the wheels, and strangers who had never spoken before stood together, sharing quiet stories about kindness and courage. The grocery reopened, brighter this time, its shelves full again. The boy's mother, Elena, was back behind the counter, her ribs healed, her spirit stronger. And right beside the register, she had placed a small toy truck, red and shiny, next to a jar labeled "For those who can't fight alone." One morning, Colt stopped by before the shop opened. Elena was sweeping the floor, humming softly. She looked up, surprised but smiling. "You're early," she said. Colt shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." He handed her an envelope. No words on it, just a faint oil smudge on the corner. "What's this?" she asked. "A little something from the Guardians," he said. "For the repairs, and for the boys' school." She tried to hand it back, shaking her head. "You've already done enough." Colt's voice softened. "Let someone help you this time." Elena's eyes watered, but she smiled. "You sound like someone who's been told that before." He chuckled. "Maybe I have." When he left, the boy was sitting on the curb outside, sketching something in a notebook. "Hey, big guy," Colt said, crouching beside him. "What's that?" The boy turned the page toward him. It was a rough drawing of a biker on a motorcycle with wings behind him, chasing away dark clouds. "That's you," the boy said proudly. Colt laughed. "Wings, huh?" The boy nodded seriously. "You don't need them. You already fly." That simple sentence stuck with Colt longer than he expected. He thought about it while riding through the industrial zone later that day, where half the factories still stood silent after the investigations. People had started talking about workers' rights again, about fairness, about protection. It wasn't perfect, but change had begun. At the far end of the zone, he noticed something new. A small team of volunteers putting up a wooden sign in front of a worn-down warehouse. He stopped his bike and walked closer. The sign read, "Future site of Haven Workshop, employment for all." A man in a construction vest walked up, recognizing Colt instantly. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he said. "The Guardians." Colt tilted his head. "Who's asking?" The man smiled. "Name's Bennett. I used to work under that factory you straightened out. When they closed, a few of us decided to start fresh. No bosses, no fear, just honest work. Thought we'd build something that helps, not hurts." Colt looked at the sign again. "You'll need funding." Bennett shrugged. "We'll manage. Sometimes you just start with belief." Colt nodded slowly. "Belief's good, but I might know a few people who can help." 2 days later, the Guardians rode into the zone again, this time not for confrontation, but to deliver supplies. Lumber, metal parts, toolboxes, all paid for by donations gathered quietly from people who remembered the boy's story. The sound of engines that once carried fear now carried hope. Workers from across the neighborhood showed up to help, and soon the skeleton of the new workshop began to rise. That evening, as the sun set over the construction site, Bennett handed Colt a small nameplate carved out of wood. "Thought this belonged here," he said. On it were the words "For those who ride for others." Colt ran his fingers over the letters, saying nothing. As he was leaving, he saw Elena and her son walking toward the site, carrying a tray of sandwiches for the workers. The boy waved when he saw Colt. "Mom says I can work here when I'm older," he shouted. Colt smiled. "You'll be running the place by then." Later that night, the Guardians gathered at the hill overlooking the city. The lights stretched out below them like stars scattered on the ground. Rocco stood beside Colt, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked quietly. "About what?" "About writing, about all this." We've done enough good to fill a lifetime." Colt didn't answer right away. He looked down at the glow of the workshop in the distance, faint but steady. "You ever seen how the road disappears behind you when you ride?" he said finally. "You can't go back to where you started, not really. All you can do is keep going. Somebody somewhere's always waiting." Rocco nodded. "So we keep riding." The engines came alive one by one, echoing through the night like a heartbeat. Before he pulled down his visor, Colt glanced at the sky, clear, wide, endless. He thought of the boy's words. "You already fly." And as they rode into the horizon, the lights of the workshop flickered like a trail behind them, proof that even the darkest roads could lead to something beautiful when you had the courage to keep going. A year passed, and the sound of engines had become part of the city's rhythm, steady, protective, familiar. The Guardians weren't ghosts anymore. They were a promise. Every time trouble began to stir, every time someone tried to take advantage of the helpless, people whispered the same thing: "They'll come." No one ever said their names. They didn't have to. The workshop called Haven had grown faster than anyone expected. What started as a half-built warehouse had become a full operation. Machines humming, workers laughing, and kids from the shelter helping after school. The sign on the wall read, "Built by hands that once feared." Elena now ran the kitchen there, feeding every worker who couldn't afford a meal. Her son, now taller, wore a small jacket with the Guardian emblem stitched onto the back, a gift Colt had given him. He called himself Junior Guardian, and nobody argued with it. One crisp morning, Colt rode into Haven for the first time in weeks. He had been out of town, helping in another city that had heard their story and wanted to build something similar. The moment he stepped off his bike, Elena spotted him and waved. "You picked a good day," she said. "We're celebrating our 1-year mark." Colt smiled. "Didn't know we were throwing parties now." "We weren't," she said, smiling. "But people started showing up with food and stories. We figured we'd let them." Inside the workshop, laughter bounced off the walls. Workers stood around tables filled with homemade bread, soup, and coffee. The boy ran over, proudly showing Colt a small wooden plaque he'd carved himself. On it was a red toy truck, tiny, detailed, perfect. "It's for you," the boy said, "so you don't forget where it started." Colt took it, his throat tight. "You think I ever could?" As the day went on, people shared stories of how Haven had helped them. A woman who'd found a second chance after losing her job, an old man who could finally work without fear of being shouted at, even a young mechanic who said the Guardian's visits had inspired him to stay out of trouble. Colt listened quietly, his usual tough expression softening with every word. Later, when most of the crowd had gone home, Bennett approached him with something in his hands, a newspaper clipping framed in glass. The headline read, "Local riders inspire movement across the state." Below it was a photo of the Guardians riding in formation, sun rising behind them. "They're calling it the Road of Hope," Bennett said. "Other towns are starting their own groups. It's spreading." Colt studied the picture for a long moment. "Hope doesn't belong to us," he said. "It belongs to the people who believe in it." Bennett smiled. "Then you gave them a reason to." As night fell, the workshop quieted. The boy sat on the steps outside, the streetlights casting long shadows. Colt joined him, both of them looking toward the distant mural still glowing faintly under the lights. "You think things stay good forever?" the boy asked suddenly. Colt thought for a long time before answering. "Nothing stays the same. Not the bad, not the good. But what matters is who you become while you're trying to make it better." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "Then I want to become like you." Colt laughed softly. "Then promise me something. Never let anger be louder than kindness." "That's the only reason I got anywhere worth going." The boy smiled. "Deal." Moments later, a truck pulled up near the gate. 2 men stepped out, factory inspectors from another city. "We're looking for the one they call Colt," one said. "We've got a situation out west. Workers being hurt, families scared. They told us this place knows how to fix what others break." Colt stood, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You've got the wrong man," he said quietly. Then he smiled faintly. "But you found the right people." Rocco appeared from the shadows near the bikes. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. Colt nodded. "It never ends, does it?" Rocco grinned. "Wouldn't want it to." The engine started again, the sound rolling through the streets like distant thunder. Elena came out holding the boy's hand, both watching as the Guardians prepared to ride. "Be careful," she said. Colt smiled. "Always." Before he left, the boy ran forward and pressed the tiny wooden truck into his hand. For luck, he said. Colt looked at it, then at the boy. You keep this. You're the reason I carry mine. The boy hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out another, an exact copy he'd carved himself. Then we both have one. Colt laughed softly, started his bike, and looked back one last time. The workshop lights flickered behind him, and in their glow, he saw something that made him pause. A small line of kids standing near the gate, each wearing tiny cardboard helmets, pretending to ride invisible motorcycles. They weren't playing. They were practicing courage. As the Guardians rode out of the city, the wind carried the echo of their engines across the streets, past the mural, past the shop, past everything they had helped rebuild. And somewhere in that sound was the quiet truth Colt had always known. Heroes don't live forever, but the things they protect do. The boy watched until the last light disappeared over the hill, his mother's hand on his shoulder. He smiled, whispering to himself, "Fly safe, Colt." If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.